Okay, so I've started the YouTube live stream. I don't know who actually watches it, but it's there. And
are you using the same laptop?
no,
Because the voice is a little bit different.
is it? Okay. Well, I've got the same microphone, but I'm using a different computer. How is the voice?
It's a little bit down. It's not coming out so clear as it was doing with the other laptop.
Okay, that's interesting.
Maybe you could, if you have like headphones or something.
Okay. How's that? Is that any better? Gerald?
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, how's that? Is that any better?
Yeah, it's slightly better, but with a little screeching, a little bit of feedback.
Okay. Should be okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah, that's better now.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, let's go then. So Stella is in Nativali.
Oh, interesting. Is she going to be?
And she's going to join us. Yes, she's just.
Is Clovis also there?
He's going to go. They're going to teach on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. She's on her way somewhere else, but she's dropped into Nativali on the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. So are they doing the course with Clovis, or is a different setup?
He's just going to go and visit and do some practicals with some of the people that we're talking to.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So that should be interesting. Not quite as ready this week, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Okay, Simon.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Simon. Hi, Nicholas.
Welcome, everyone. We are live for our session 7, part 7 of our PDC, and I hope people are finding it useful. And we've been on quite a journey already, and I'm going to try and pull a few things together in today's session to get us thinking about systems. Let's just see. And okay. Is that, can you see that, Gerald? Does that look okay?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay, good, great. Okay.
Distance. But still the volume is still a little bit down. I'm using max, but I don't know. People with a little bit weaker gadgets may not be able to get us so clear.
Okay. Oh yeah, I'm on a different computer today, so I'm not sure how to boost the volume. Okay. Hopefully it's going to be okay.
Otherwise, the presentation is okay.
Okay, good. I'm just trying to make my mind up how am I going to do this. Okay. Okay. Let's start. Okay. So greetings everyone. We're going through the principles of permaculture. We're still in our theory stage, but we're coming towards the end of it. And especially these first 8 sessions, I want to try and get you to think in abstract, to think away from your own individual circumstance. And remember, we're thinking about the general patterns. We need to understand, we need to gain a deeper understanding. And that's why we're taking this time out. So allow yourself a little bit of time and distance to see these wider patterns. And I'm actually going to spend a bit of time looking at David Holden's principles this week, because I keep talking about it, but we haven't really focused on them. But Principle 4, which is what we're entering now, is a really, really important one. And I think, and it's the beginning of us beginning to understand what permaculture really is about, because it's complicated. So Principle 4 is around systems. It's also around limits and feedback. And what we are told is, we're actually given a warning from David Holmgren. He says, the sins of the father are visited unto the 7th generation. I kind of think it sounds a bit biblical and a bit scary. Let's think about what that means. But that if we make mistakes, they have very long-term consequences. The sins of the fathers are visited unto the 7th generation. Gosh. Also, within some wiser, shall we say, traditional communities, maybe some of the indigenous Americans that lived around the lakes, the Great Lake area in North America, would consider the impact of each decision that they made as a community on how that might impact on future generations, okay, on the 7th generation. How is what we're doing today going to affect my children's 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 children, however many that is? So this requires long-term thinking. It requires a slightly different kind of thinking, and to know that, okay, how would we know that what we were doing was correct? How would we even begin the implementation part? I mean, that's part is to feedback. Feedback is the information that's coming back to you all the time. If you create something, it will have a knock-on effect. We understand what those are. To jump in and understand the impacts that we're having. Such important. And that's why understanding that there are limitations and also that you receive. If I explain that, but here's another way of looking at it. When we ride a bike, perfectly, we turn over the ground as we have our weight changes. So the balance of the bike make adjustments, what we call a dynamic equilibrium. It's upright because of forms, the road isn't level, maybe potholes, maybe not going in a straight, weight moves as you move along. That what I think about your innate balance means um, you know, can you hear me, Gerald?
Steve,
Yes.
still, I I think that the laptop is really, really down, and at some point it had like a sound crash.
Maybe I should switch.
Yeah.
Okay, that's gonna be a bit difficult. Okay, maybe okay. Okay, Gerald, let you have a. I'll put you in charge. You can do a bit of a chat, and I'm going to switch over to my.
Okay. Hi everyone. Okay, as Steve gets the IT sorted, probably we would hear from each of us, still a small group, so we could take around, not putting anyone on the spot, but we could take around and then maybe a few overviews from the previous sessions and probably what you expect or what you're looking forward to. Hello, Nicholas, Peter, Yeah, Steve will be back on shortly. He's getting the laptop sorted. All right. Otherwise, in terms of feedback, or now we are into the systems thinking aspect. Yeah. Feedback, systems limits, and then feedback. It all adds back to the observations. You've observed, you've interacted, and now you're still observing. It's only after you've done clear observation or when you constantly do your observation that you can get to realize the kind of feedback. And then most of these principles are intertwined. It's not that you observe and then stop observing. Throughout the process, because it's a process, it's a cycle, you have to keep applying each and every principle at different stages. Yeah, so that's why you get to see that even within the system, like now at the point of feedback, you still have elements of observation. January, you're welcome. Okay, anyone having any contribution, any addition, any feedback from the previous sessions is welcome, or any questions, yeah, as we wait for Steve to get the IT sorted. Yes, Nicholas.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to be with you here today. So it's like just I wish to contribute by giving my feedback from the previous lessons that we have learned. So as today we are supposed to start about apply self-regulation and accept the feedback. So according to me, as the principle one of permaculture, it states that you first observe and interact, of which you are told to walk around and borrow knowledge, or walk around and see the challenges when I relate it to our farms. We should walk around and observe the problems and challenges that we are facing, or that we are going through, or the problem that our farms are having. So after we have observed them, so here we come and interact with them. So how will we interact with the challenges or the problem? So here, when we want to interact with them, we see that, or we find that we will look for some solution on how to solve them. So after getting the solution to solve the problems that we are encountering from our farms. So here, so we are coming here to see or to get that the interaction, the solution that we made, which we can still call that the self-regulation. So we'll accept the answers that we will be getting from the observation and interaction that we first made in our farms. So after setting the regulation or the rules or the things that I said that I want to work on in my farm for me to have a good produce in my farm. So here you see that we will be accepting the feedback that we will be getting. though there are some feedbacks that will be negative, and we'll have positive feedback. But I can say that we will accept all the feedback that we will be getting from the farms or from the regulations that we have set after observing and interacting. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nicholas. That is brilliant. So, yes, it goes back to treating your system as a system, not looking at individual elements. So, whichever feedback you get is going to guide your next steps, is going to guide how you're going to progress. Yes, Steve, welcome back. Back to you. Thanks, Nicholas.
Okay, so it's all a bit confusing. I'm jumped on different computers and so forth. We'll see how this goes now.
Yeah, that is brilliant. It sounds brilliant now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. That's interesting. How it didn't work. Yeah, Nicholas, thank you for your question. And for sure, about and together. To try and get us to thinking what is giving you right, but you know, board, you know, become more visual tweaks and we strategically and so we don't want to going. Keep observing all the time, as Gerald rightly said. It's not just go one off, taking in new information. You're looking at the road. As that's for how we are in permaculture. We're constantly observing, interacting, and making changes, and creating this sort of dynamic equilibrium. Now, keep this idea in mind. Natural systems work. There's lots of these points. That's what we need to understand better. And if we can correct those, then we start. As a designer, physicist, humanist, I don't know, a very interesting guy called Buckminster Fuller said this: you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model. So here really I think he's talking, you know, that, so in permaculture we're interested in design, also reminding us don't go head to head, something better. And that's our challenge as part of design is, can if there's problems, things and go deep. Not going to, statement. Okay. It's been coloured, but it is of mosquito. Magnified greatly. I get from this, and I'm not sure exactly why I put it into the slideshow. I stumbled across the sometimes those images, and they make me think really we disregard or we see as kind of mildly. Look how complex, how many different components. There's little hooks that can hold that. Hook on the feedback. It's getting information. Me.
Steve. Steve. Probably you may try.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's a bit wobbly.
Oh gosh, frustrating. Sorry.
Maybe is it that because the other time it was clear, but it was so low, and the microphone was probably having issues. So maybe how about logging out the other machine? Because they are now both using the same broadband. Maybe you could just log it out of Zoom, the second machine.
Hello, how is that? Testing.
Yeah, still a bit cracky. Could it be, Steve? Could it be because you're having two logins, two active logins?
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, now we have one.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, that's
I keep
better,
getting
Steve.
that my hello.
Yes, Steve.
Oh,
It's a bit low, but at least the network is stronger.
okay. How's this? Hello, hello. Testing, testing.
Yes, is is clearer in terms of network, so we could proceed with that one.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll just recommend that in case it's a little bit low, let everyone probably up
Yeah.
their gadget volume.
Okay, we'll try again. I'm ever so sorry for these hiccups. I'm in a different office this week, so that hasn't helped. We're talking about dynamic equilibrium. We're also talking about active observation and reinvention. And I'm also kind of reminding you just how complicated nature is. And if that's just the foot of a mosquito, how do we understand the forest system? These are interesting points. Okay, so here's our permaculture flower. Here's a thought that's saying, let's not try and do everything at once. How do we go about thinking about things which are really complex? And this is a model from David Holmgren's book, and I think it's very interesting. So he's thinking about a task, and he's saying that we need to explore areas that petals overlap each other. Then he put on, and he's reminding us that in terms of tackling our problems, creating design, we need to think in a holistic way. And in doing that, we're going to sort of embark on a journey. That journey maybe begins for him first petal of the flower that we're looking at. The journey begins here. When we talked about yields, we said you stomach. You have to be strong in yourself to be able to interact with the people around you. So allow ourselves some time to grow and learn, to realize, hey, we're not all experts in all of these things. It takes time. Maybe we need to form alliances with other people, collaborations. Maybe we need to learn or educate ourselves. But this is a step-by-step journey, slowly, slowly. And as we move through it and we think about all these different things, this is how we can build things which are long-term, resilient, and successful. So maybe our first journey around is just thinking and acknowledging these different areas and thinking about how they interact with us. So there's something about our own health and spiritual well-being as our start point. And that if we have our health and we have our well-being, we have our sense of what we're doing, we can now begin to interact with the outside world and maybe get a job, maybe start to build a plan about how we're going to go about meeting our own needs. think about finances and economics, how we interact with other people in terms of meeting our own needs. If we want to start some kind of an enterprise, we want to actually, it's going to have to be in a physical place, or we're going to have to work with other people. So let's think about, can we, as we move around through our journey, we're thinking about finance and economics. We're thinking also is, how do we access for land? Community governance. Can we build alliances with other people? Can we build a common vision that we can move forward on? Starting from the self, thinking about money and finance, thinking about land and community governance. How are decisions being made? Look, you guys in Nacha Valley, you're in an interesting situation. I don't know the answer to these questions for your situation, but you're clearly having to struggle and look around and see available opportunities. Can you get hold of some land? Can you build a relationship with other people? Okay, so if you can do that, then there's another whole school of learning is that comes with responsibility. How am I going to take care of that land? The nature stewardship. Can we make sure that the quality of that land is improving? What is it that we need to know to do that? There's a whole school of permaculture around land management, regenerative farming, agroecology, agroforestry. Gosh, lots to know about nature stewardship. But firstly, we're just thinking about these areas and realizing this is what we're going to need to know about. Where we have land, we often have buildings. We're going to have some kind of a structure. Let's think about how that building might affect and relate to the land. Can that building be part of our land management strategy? Remember, when it comes to designing, every element we put in our design has to perform multiple functions. Every component of our design needs to benefit the whole system. So how can we, and again, as we move into situations, we accept feedback. We try and understand the limitations, and we realize that we're trying to build a system. So there's lots to know about building. We can do very simple kind of forms of building. We can do complex forms of building. We can make buildings perform multiple functions as well. Again, lots to think about in terms of that, and we'll go further into that later on in future lectures. As we interact with land and buildings, we need tools and technology. Our technologies might begin with very simple. Some of the permaculture tools that we like to use, like the A-frame, hand tools, simple tools. These are empowering. If that's what we start off with, we can slowly build systems. So let's think about the tools that we need to begin with and the tools that we can use to further our objectives. And let's think about how these things fit together as a whole, how they overlap. As we move around through our Permaculture Flower, our sequence of activities, so we learn and we gain experience, and our responsibility, permaculture designers, as adults, as members of the community, is to educate the people around us. Think about our own education, think of our own knowledge, and then think about how we share, how we might contribute that knowledge to the people around us, and how a rising knowledge base creates culture. Remember, we're interested in a permanent culture. And I would argue that everyone in our community really needs to have, we need to be on the same page. We need to be pulling in the same direction. We need to not be at odds with each other. And I think that the real power of permaculture education is it brings us together as people, right? So, and look how, as we move around, personal, start with the personal health, spiritual well-being, thinking about livelihood, thinking about access to resources, thinking about how to manage those resources, whether it's land and building, thinking about the tools and the technologies that we use, and then how, as we accumulate knowledge, we can use that. That accumulation of knowledge also affects our health and spiritual well-being. We grow. So look how, as we go around thinking, visiting each one of these houses, look how the line advances. We have this spiral of slow but steady growth. There's a potential yeah, sorry, I'm just making a message. I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what to suggest about the network. Other than to soldier on. So this is a very simple model. Remember, the real world's complicated. We're trying to make it simple by creating models. This, our permaculture flower model, is telling us we can't do everything at once. We start slowly by visiting each area and then building on top of that. I think that's our process forward. That's our, I think it's an interesting strategy for dealing with the complexity of the world that is with us. Okay, this is FDR, Franklin Roosevelt. He was the US president in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, there was a terrible depression. The global economy collapsed, especially in America, and then that created shockwaves around the world. It's interesting that that's kind of happening again. Something that's happened before can always happen again. And he's talking here about the redistribution of income. He said the freest government, if it exists, would not be long acceptable. If the tendency of the laws were to create a rapid accumulation of property in few hands and to render the great mass of the population dependent and penniless. He's saying that if we fail to address inequality, governments fail. It certainly leads to long-term problems. Okay, so this is feedback. This is a sign that the system isn't working if there's lots of unemployed people, if there's lots of poor people, if there's lots of displaced people. So let's go right back to our first, actually to our first quote is, we never change things by fighting an existing reality. We change something by coming up with a new model. That new model, my friends, is permaculture. This is, we're learning to think differently. And the ex-president of the United States is confirming to us that things are not right. We need new thinking because we have so many visible problems. You know, I'm talking about economic inequality here because of this quote, but we could talk about you know, extreme weather, climate change, war, conflict. These are all signs that things aren't right. Things aren't going right. And I honestly believe the world needs new leadership, and it needs leadership from the bottom up, from real people like ourselves, like you guys, because we have a greater understanding of, like, we're receiving more feedback. If you're living in a gilded palace in a rich place, you're not really getting the feedback. You're not understanding the suffering or the hardship that people are experiencing around the world. And this is an ongoing situation that's getting ever more extreme. So this is something to really, really think about. Okay. Go back to these pyramids. Let's systems. I want us to explore in the next few slides is this idea in nature, everything is connected to everything else. We talked a little bit about integrated pest management, I think, last week, and the idea that in a healthy ecosystem with many components, you don't get pests, you don't get weeds because things are self-regulate. So here's a pattern. Here's a simple pattern for us to understand. And let's again think about it. Real world's complicated. We're trying to make it simple so we can understand it. Here we have an ecosystem with look 1, 2, 3, 4 trophic levels. We've got always plants at the bottom, translating the energy of the sun into stored forms of into carbohydrates and so forth, and that that's always going to be the greatest amount of biomass, because look at all of these rats and mice and rabbits and grasshoppers that are going to eat that grass. There's always going to be an energy loss. So from one trophic level to the next. But there's a direct relationship between the amount of grass and obviously the amount of small mammals and invertebrates that are eating that grass. Then there's going to be a trophic level of primary predators. Here we've got snakes. So a direct relationship between how much grass there is, how many of these small mammals there are, and then the snake population that the ecosystem is able to support. Here, look, we've got a predatory bird, we've got a secondary predator there. We can think about, again, the health, the numbers of that peak predator, that hunting bird, tells us a lot about the whole ecosystem. So think about how different elements in a system can be indicators of the health and vibrancy of the system. We're observing year after year after year. We have a sense of the populations of certain key species in our ecosystem, and that tells us something very real and important about the ecosystem. So think about that. Think about how our active observations are telling us something about the health of a whole system. And think also how that these seemingly different things are absolutely related. So if suddenly we have lots of rats, what does that tell us? It tells us that maybe there's an imbalance in the system. It's feedback. And if there's suddenly many more rats than there was, there has to be a reason. Is it that some of these predators are missing? Some of these higher up species are missing? Or is it that there's suddenly an enlarged food supply below the rats? But there's a reason and there's a relationship. And if you observe and interact and ask fundamental questions, you can find a way to restore balance to your system. Is a similar system to add another little bit of complexity. Is okay, we've got our plants and our herbivores and our primary and secondary predators, but then there's also a whole layer of organisms that live in the soil and have a relationship with those plants. They might be detrivores. They might be things that are decaying, breaking down the detritus, the dead matter, and making that available to plants. Or they could be the centipedes and millipedes and things that might be predating on other soil life. So They put this word in here. I had to look it up. I didn't know what it meant. An autotroph and heterotroph. So an autotroph is an organization, sorry, an organism that can create its own food, can create its own energy. And plants do that by trapping energy from the sun. And the heterotrophs can only get their energy by eating the plants. So again, understand that there are complex relationships within this system. And actually, when we arrange things like this as a pyramid, we tend to think about a food chain, where in reality, life's more complicated. It's more of a food web. For example, this secondary predator might also eat at the other layers as well, at the other trophic layers. It might eat some plants, it might eat some herbivores, and it might eat some primary predators, as well as being the secondary predator. So, a complex web of relationships. Through observation, we can begin to understand what those relationships are. So, again, is when we looked at ecosystems, I tried to really push over the point that the forest isn't just trees. It contains insects, animals, birds, fungi, complexity of different things living together as a system. If we're going to be permaculture farmers, what we're trying to do is to build complex systems. We've got to get away from monocultures, from simple ways of doing things. But okay, look, here's an aquatic-based system, which school child has talked about for us, which is quite nice. And okay, so ecosystems, relationships between elements that together self-regulate and create a whole. That's what we're thinking about. That's what we're seeing here. I'm understanding that especially when it comes to farming or the yields might come at different trophic levels, and they consequently have different values. There's going to be a relationship between those things. So if we harvest all of the plants, then the herbivores and the primary carnivores might all disappear, and the secondary carnivore might move away to somewhere else. So these are things which we want to bear in mind. Okay, now I mentioned this gentleman before, but I want to come back to him and enlarge on it a little bit, because this man is a systems thinker. This is Yakuba Sawadogo. He's a farmer in Burkina Faso, in West Africa. And he is there, look, with a thorn tree. And in this image, you can imagine him. He's talking about succession. Now, we've really labored on the point of succession. We talked about how some plants build the conditions for more complex plants to come after them. This is what this man realized through observation. He's renowned as triggering one of the most successful reforestation programs anywhere in the world. And he did it through careful observation and systems thinking. So this represents a lot of work. These are zai pits. They are shallow holes excavated in the surface of the land. Now, one of Yakuba's observations was that as we degrade the ground and it becomes ever harder and compacted and drier, when it rains, it can't receive the water. And this happens a lot in refugee settlements. I can see that. So he was aware of a just traditional technique. So he started exploring it and seeing what he could do with it. he was doing observing and interacting, and his strategy was to catch and store energy. So this Xi method is to excavate small holes, break open the surface of the soil. Maybe if you've got a spoil heap, you've got some spare sort of soil you dug out. If that's on a slope, that could be on the downward side of the slope, because we're going to try and trap and slow down the water. And then now we've got somewhere to establish what look like beans. It looks like he's starting off with nitrogen fixing plants. He's starting a succession, but it's cleverer than that. In this picture, what we're seeing is he started to experiment by, yes, there's he dug his little Xi pit, and he's added the earth ridge to help slow down any surface flow. He's added manure to the pit so that that will help trap water and also start to provide the biology to rebuild the soil. The next thing he's done is he's added termite nests, eggs into it, and those termites are now going to burrow down into the soil when the conditions are right and open up passageways. What this diagram is trying to illustrate is this dotted line is the ground here becomes moist because it can receive the water. The water can percolate in, and that's going to then be supported by this biology that's in the soil. And remember what I told you is any kind of soil is fertile. The minerals you need to grow are always there, but what isn't there is the biology. It's the soil microbes that you need, and those soil microbes need energy. So if there's no plants, how are they going to feed? There has to be plants. And this again is what Yakuba realized was nature wants to grow. Nature wants to follow a succession. There are hardy plants that can fix their own nitrogen. We talked about symbiosis. We talked about the rhizobium bacteria that lives in the roots with plants of the bean family, peas and beans, what we call the nitrogen fixers. Okay, and there's many shrubs and trees that are also in this family, leguminous plants. By leguminous, it means they have an association with a bacteria that can fix its own nitrogen from the atmosphere and then trade that with the plant in return for sugar. And Yakuba understood that, and he set about triggering the natural succession around his village. Now, he wasn't thinking right away about crops. He wasn't thinking about what am I going to eat, what am I going to sell. What he thought was, how do we create fertile soil? And interestingly, what happened is certain kinds of plants, the seeds which were there in the soil already, maybe dormant for many, many years, were triggered by opening the soil, by the extra humidity, and the plants then started to germinate. And this is a process that you can copy. This is a process that doesn't necessarily take any resources other than the work to start off the process. Okay, think about what he's done. Think about he's observed what's available, and he started the process to trigger a succession. Now, I don't know exactly what trees that came in the system that Yakuba was growing, but what we do know is there's plenty of plants around that we do. I encourage you to observe. To example, variety of uses. We use as a green manure, soil. A charcoal source, the pyrolysis of charcoal. We can feed it to livestock. We can use it for soil conservation. The seeds from the beans can be used as beads. We see the planted for firewood on an area of 46 square miles that we've seen it. We use enough energy equivalent as 1 million barrels of oil per year. 1 million barrels of oil over 46 square miles is a lot.
Hi, Tim. Just hold on a little bit for Steve. He's getting the text sorted so that we get a better sound quality, and then he'll log in again. We can go on with the interactions. Anyone having any question or any additions, you're welcome to contribute. And then as we wait for Steve to log on, let's use this time to interact.
Mm.
Deborah, Simon, Stella, anyone with any feedback? Hilda, it would be great to hear from you. Or maybe so far, what have we, learned, or any reflections on today's session?
It's open. Yeah, get together.
Yes, Stella, we can hear you.
Okay, this is not Stella. I'm just using Stella's device. This is Caroline.
Oh, Caroline, good to.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good to hear from you. And thank you for making it way on time. Simon?
They've stopped. It's okay, they can. We've really appreciated today. Though, as usual, the class is very interesting.
Okay. Okay, sorry
Yeah.
about the tech. We're getting it sorted, but sure, the content is brilliant. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But
Yes,
okay,
Steve? Yes, Steve.
I think I'm back.
Yeah, now loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm really sorry, everyone, for these complications. So many. Okay, so can we see my screen now?
It's very clear now. And
Okay.
the presentation is also wonderful. Maybe in the long run, you could do a quick wrap up or a run through.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now it's crystal clear. Just maintain that, please.
Oh, how funny, isn't it? Isn't that really weird? So, and I've lost track of whether I'm actually recording this or not.
No, it's not on the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oops.
You can turn on that.
Sorry.
Oh.
Okay, there we go. I'm trying. Okay, everyone. Sorry for all of the fiddles, hassles. We're back. We're trying to think about systems. We're realizing that when you're in a system and everything's complicated, everything's connected, you're actually getting feedback all the time. Sometimes it's difficult to see that feedback because the system is so complicated. So I've given you a very simple example of this idea of a sort of a dynamic equilibrium of a bicycle. We talked about the sheer complexity of even something as like the toe of a mosquito is so complicated. And we've used this model to think about how we might move through, understand, to think about the complexity of the situation that we're in. This is how we might approach thinking about design. And I've also said that when things aren't working, you know, that's the time when we realize that perhaps we need to make significant changes. We need to change the system. In the 1930s, our government spent a lot of money on infrastructure projects to create jobs. It changed what they did. And well, and it led the world towards a war as well, which is another scary thought. But anyway, and then we sort of think about these relationships in systems, these a trophic pyramid. We try to understand this mechanism of how nature works, what an ecosystem looks like. So as a farmer, as a gardener, think about where we fit in, what we're doing within that ecosystem. And that if that system is in some way out of balance, one or other of those species might predominate or might disappear. And that is in itself is feedback. That's how we understand complexity. Okay. And we've also said that these relationships within systems are a bit more complicated than we realize. And rather than thinking of a food chain, we think of food webs. We think of this sort of web of interconnections. So these are the models that nature gives us, remember? And what I'm saying to you within permaculture is we're going to learn from these, we're going to copy them, and we're going to learn to value every component and understand that it's the system is constantly speaking to us, it's giving us information. Okay, so this is Yakuba Sawadogo. We've mentioned him before, and we mention him again. He's our teacher. He's our mwalimu. He's there to teach us. And number one, he's saying is, we don't want to see bare soil. We do not want to see bare soil. There can't be life in bare soil. How's it going to hold water? You know, where's the sugar coming from? Where's the energy coming from? So we want to kickstart succession, says Yakuba. And he says, look, it can be as simple as just disturbing the ground, but we could be methodical. We could do that in a very careful and thought out way. It might happen by accident anyway, you know, but here he's done it with a plan, with a deliberate plan. And he's not just excavated the holes, he's shaped them so that they catch the surface water when we have a rain. He's put plants and materials there so that they're quickly going to start growing and putting sugars into the soil and starting to feed the soil microbes. This is how we get succession. And he's even enhanced that by adding the termites, adding other elements that are going to support the function of soil building. So we want to work with elements that perform multiple functions. We also want to support key functions with multiple elements. So look, here the function is water trapment. The elements are the hole, the bank, the compost, and the termites. Each one of those elements supports the function of water trapment. And we're trapping water because we want to build soil. We want to rapidly grow plants in that soil to start feeding the soil microbes so that the fertility becomes available. So, and the plants perhaps that we might look at and look to are fast growing nitrogen fixing plants. They don't need fertilizer. They can create their own. They can create their own by building relationships with biology, with bacteria. This is what you want to do. You want to build a relationship with these plants so that they can do the same job for you. Let's understand that these fast growing soil building plants that we start off with are going to work really hard for us, because they're not only providing the biomass and feeding the soil microbes, they actually then provide other yields, things that we could perhaps feed our animals with, feed our chickens with, have edible seeds maybe. Maybe we can make charcoal from it. We can use it as wood fuel. We can compost the parts of the plant that we're not utilizing, and we can use all of that to build our soil. These plants provide shade, reduce evaporation. Think about how these things might combine so that we start to build the long-term conditions that we want for growing. Now you might say, well, I don't want to grow this plant. I'm not planning on eating it. I'm not going to use it. You could make a hedge out of it. You can grow it around the edge of your field. You can use it in clever ways. Think how you can strategically place elements in your design so that you get the benefit. This is what we're trying to get you to think about. This is permaculture being strategic. Okay, Caliandra is another one of this same type of class of plants. I've seen these growing very close together to create living hedges. So again, think about functions. Oh, we could grow a kind of plant that builds soil, feeds us, feeds our livestock, gives us compost, builds nitrogen in the soil, and it can be a livestock fence. So we can use elements strategically to perform multiple functions, and we can choose elements that support lots of different functions. This is how we think in permaculture. So here's a lovely little picture of a forest garden or something like that. So just think about how the mix of elements in this system. Okay, some of these are fruit trees, some of these are existing to feed you or to give a yield to the farmer, and perhaps some of these trees are there to support the other life in the system. Because remember, we have to create yields that feed every element in our system. So we've got little worm farms and compost bins and nest boxes. We've got herbs. We've got a seat for people. We've added elements to our system that support the functions. We've got some kind of a water trapment here. Look, it's just a fun picture. It's just a sketch, but what it's trying to do is show us how we might then group things together to support our long-term aims. So in this, we've had this picture before, and I'll just touch on, bring it back into again. Let's just think of any element in this system, the worm farm, this fruit bush, this compost heap, it's going to have inputs and outputs. There's things that needs to go in, and there's things that it's going to generate that's going to come out from it. So where are those inputs going to come from? Can we design the system so that this element can meet its own needs? So it's saying here, this is a chicken. It's a silver spangled Hamburg hen, and it needs shelter. It needs grit and dust and water, air, food. It needs other chickens. It needs a perch. All sorts of. It needs some kind of protection. If we're clever as designers, we can make those elements available to the chicken so it may take care of itself. Otherwise, you've got to do work for the chicken. You've got to bring the things to the chicken. It also has outputs. Yes, eggs, meat, feathers, manure, methane, carbon dioxide. It does scratching, foraging, flying, fighting, grooming. Can you allow each element in your system to meet its own needs and for its output to be usefully used in other parts of the system? So let's think about, when we understand a way of thinking how things relate, how the connections between things. A good way of understanding that is think of it in terms of the inputs and outputs. So if we understand what the chicken needs and we can provide for those needs within this system, then there's an element which is going to be part of the yield that doesn't require lots of work. It doesn't require us to look after it all the time. Okay. So this is a lovely picture which we again looked at earlier. This is out of Bill Mollison's designer's manual. But look here, he's designed a chicken forage system in which, yes, there's a fence to keep them safe. They've got somewhere to lay, which they like. But look, it's harvesting water, producing the food that the animals need. And we've got a living system, perennial greens, lots of other things that can absorb and recycle the manure from the chickens. Thinking in systems, thinking in terms of inputs and outputs, thinking in terms of relationships, thinks in terms of every element in the system needs to be able to meet its own needs, and the system needs to be able to absorb and recycle the waste products being produced. That's our template from nature. This is how we might begin to bring these ideas into design. I liked this image. It's from a practical workshop that a colleague of ours, Godfrey Opolot, did in his school in Nyero in Uganda. And Godfrey engaged with the school and gave them a challenge to think about adding elements into the school system that help them recycle waste, compost systems. They made biochar to support fertility. They started some growing systems for gardens. They had some education and training to bring people together as a team. So again, as permaculture designers, you think about that flower that I showed you earlier. Think about how do we approach something? Oh, there's many aspects to this. We're not just digging a hole and planting some trees. We're doing education. We're building compost. We're doing a site survey of the school. We're developing growing areas. We're doing other activities to support growing, and we're doing training and education. So think about all of those things that might come together to create a permaculture design. Many elements contributing together to build a system. Put this in as a classic plant guild, and thinking about the relationships between. So this is a very classic, I think this is an Iroquois, Indian, North America farming technique. Is they plant the maize. Maize is a very heavy feeder. It has a lot of biomass. It takes a lot from the soil. So what could we could start our maize off, and as it establishes, could we add another element to that system that would support the maize? Well, we might germinate some beans, and there might be climbing beans that go up the maize. There might be beans also of that leguminous family that contribute nitrogen to the soil that helps support the maize plants. So I think maize is a big tall plant, beans like to climb. Well, the third element of this plant guild is squash, pumpkins, a plant that goes sideways, another heavy feeder, but a plant that covers a lot of ground, suppresses weeds, and we could perhaps have a yield at the ground level. So think about how we've got the pumpkins, there's maize, and then the beans climbing up through it. We're starting to think in systems. We're starting trying to think about what are the needs of the soil. Can we keep the soil covered and cool and shaded? And can we provide extra nutrient boost to support these heavy feeding plants? So that's a first step I'm inviting you to think about polycultures, to think about the relationship between elements in a system so that they support each other, contribute to long-term fertility. So there's a field of maize and beans. Maybe you're doing this everywhere. Maybe this is a really common approach, but this is our first steps into permaculture. Is we don't want to grow just one crop. And we also want a time succession because we don't want to leave bare soil for long periods of time. Or if we are going to have bare soil, what are we going to do to protect it? We can think about patterns in different systems, different climate systems. And notice that there will be guilds of species. There are guilds of species like the tropical system with very heavy rainfall. There are guilds of species that like dry systems and can be very effective in those systems. There are guilds of species that enjoy the temperate climate. And there are even guilds of species that can survive in very cold and Arctic conditions. You'll notice that there's a lot less biomass. They're a lot smaller and squatter because there's less energy. But for sure, there's still life. So systems adapt to meet the needs and the constraints of wherever it is that they're forming. There's also, and remember also, we were given the challenge by Bill Mollison is there's maybe no upper limit to productivity. Can we add another element to the system? Can we improve its interconnectivity? Can we improve its efficiency? These are all opportunities that we might have as permaculture designers to think in a creative way. Okay, so there's just a few, well, there's a couple of big things to think about I want to get to. And then I think we'll take a break. Because we've been going an hour and a half. Okay.
Okay, we can do a break for 10 minutes.
Okay.
And
let's
then,
do that now. And then
be back at 10 past. Anyways,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's all convene back at 10 past.
Okay then. All right then.
Yeah. Feel free to drop any comments in the chat in case you need any clarification or questions. See you then.
Okay. Mm.
For those just popping in now, we are in a 10 minutes break up to 10 minutes past, so we convene back. Feel free to drop in any questions or any comments in the chat.
Okay, so it's past. We're in a kind of introduction to thinking about systems. And in this presentation, we have we jumped around a little bit, but we're trying to think about how everything's connected, how we are constantly receiving new information to help balance a system, find our way through it. We're giving some tools and models to think about how we deal with complexity and how we might step by step work our way through things, thinking about things in sequence, thinking about the relationship between elements in systems. And I try to make you think about ecosystems as whole things, to think about how they all relate and connect together, how in some way there's an intrinsic relationship between this this predator bird and every other element in the system below it, and even the droppings of this bird might be what informs and it returns to that soil and is reincorporated into the soil again. So there's also a connection between all of these layers, dynamic connections. Sometimes when we come into systems, with farming, with gardening, wherever we are, what we don't always realize is there may be elements missing from that system. And the reason why it's not working well is because there's not enough tree cover, or there aren't enough ants, or there's there might be elements that we don't understand. So when something isn't working, that's telling us something, because in nature, natural systems are abundant, natural systems are dynamic. If we can restore the balance, then we will restore abundance. This seems to be our principal lesson. And I've labored the point slightly, but I've made the point about Yakuba and understanding how you trigger succession. You put elements in the right place. You understand the natural processes that are going on around it. You choose elements that perform multiple functions. And then in doing that, you trigger what the landscape wants to do anyway, which is to be trees, to come back to life. Once that landscape starts to come back to life, now we can work with it and interact with it and start to shape and mold it and make it work for us too. I've tried to make you think about how different elements might sit in a system. This is a garden system. There's a lot of elements being put in by people, composts and wormeries and water catchment and diversity of habitat. Those things might come around through natural processes as well. We've talked about analysis of an element. We tried to think that each part of a system is going to have inputs, outputs, it's going to have certain behaviors, and in some way it's going to influence the system as a whole. And can we choose elements to put in our systems which are going to have multiple benefits? They're going to drive the system forward. That's what we're always looking for. That's the clever bit. And Bill Mollison is giving us these examples of cleverly designed systems that absorb the nutrients, allow each component to meet its own needs. And in time, this system that we're looking at is going to grow in fertility. It's regenerative. How do we achieve that in our own designs? I gave an example of our colleague Godfrey and how he approached, creating little design innovations from different aspects of the school, of the land, elements that will all contribute to a greater whole. And we also thought about relationships in terms of the Three Sisters Guild, maize, beans, and squash. How might they relate? What might be the different inputs and outputs of that? of each one of those elements. What are their requirements? How can we arrange them in spatially and in a sequence in time so that they support each other, so that we don't need, this is going to help with pest control. This is going to help with fertility. This is going to help with moisture retention, because we found beneficial relationships between those elements, and they're now starting to act as a system. These are our building blocks. Okay, this is a very simple system, but it's nonetheless, it's better than a monoculture. Here's a nice field of maize and beans to give us that sense of how those things might fit and work together. And we're reminded to also to think about how in different climate zones we get different kinds of patterns, different soil water tables, different combinations of plants, but the same processes are going on in wherever we are. Okay, so that was where we got to, and I just got 2 or 3 more slides before we come to the end of this bit of thinking. This is a landscape which has obviously clearly been devastated by fire. There's been a bushfire, a huge tsunami of fire seems to have gone through this system. Everything has been consumed. All I can see is bare soil and the char, except for down the middle, where there's clearly a water course. It's been protected. What was the thing that caused that to happen? Well, this is a landscape where the beaver has been introduced, and beavers are mammals that live in water, and they make dams. They turn streams into wetlands. And when you have a wetland, what the beaver essentially has done is massively slowed down the flow of water through this system by building dams across the river. So the water becomes deeper and it goes wider and occupies a much bigger, wider slice of the valley. And then plants, like those wet conditions, will then grow into it. So the presence of this mammal is what's prevented the whole landscape from burning. It's an element operating, an element that has multiple functions, because it's transformed the whole of this ecosystem and it's made it fire tolerant where the beaver is active. So this is what we mean by understanding lessons from nature, understanding how individual elements within systems can affect the whole system. Do we have equivalent animals in the ecosystem where we're working? Or what's the function that the beaver is performing? Can we replicate that function by doing work ourselves? We can build leaky dams as well. We can slow down the flow of water as well. So if we don't necessarily have that particular mammal, but we have maybe other possibilities to copy the function. This is what we mean by nature is our teacher. We're literally seeing the impact of the strategy of a single mammal to protect its own self, and it's created it's protected the whole ecosystem. Okay, I think that's really fascinating. This next picture is landscape where there is sheep grazing, and we can see here that clearly this section of land has been fenced off, and what we know is that's the only difference, that just by excluding the grazing animals, it's allowed little baby plants to germinate, to grow and into their full expression, to become trees. We've got heather and pine trees. We've got some deciduous trees growing here of their own volition. This is the succession. So this is in a temperate landscape. So it's going to look different from what Yakuba Sourdogo was doing, because he's an arid landscape, but the same processes are happening. The same, seeing the same patterns. And this is what nature builds, it's creating succession. And as this landscape grows and develops, builds soil, the soil biota becomes awake again, then we can move in and start farming and relating with the system. But look how it has regenerated. And so if this landscape here, this side of the fence is regenerated, what we're seeing here is degeneration. We're seeing a land that's being overgrazed, or it's been grazed to the point that no other plants can get established. So interesting lessons. Nature wants to create a patchwork complex landscape. It doesn't want to be a monoculture like this. And it only looks like this because it's been grazed too often, too hard by too many animals. And the one side of it is breaking down, the other side is building in complexity. In permaculture, we want to partner with the complexity. That's our lesson every time. So as I'm thinking about systems and interconnectedness and how there's a flow of things throughout that system, how there's a relationship between all the way back to here, there's a direct relationship between this bird and the species, the grasses and the species in it. And at the same time, there's a nutrient cycle up through those different species, which includes the predator bird, but that's also returning its nutrients back to the system as well. So it's just interesting to think about this dynamic, flowing, interconnected relationship happening on different energy layers. That's what we've been we're fascinated by. And I thought about how in our own circulatory system, it's like you never run out of blood. If you think about, well, okay, unless something terrible goes wrong, but think about the way your heart works, and it has two sides, doesn't it? The one side of the heart pushes your blood to your lungs, where it becomes oxygenated, and then it comes back to your heart again, and it goes all the way around your body. It doesn't leave. It comes back and then is reused because it's held in the system. So you never run out because it's constantly cycling. Well, this is what nature does in its systems. And that's how I want you to think about your farming system is how do we how do we prevent things from leaving the system? How do we stop it from leaking out? And can we understand the relationships between these elements? Look, it's kind of easy to see in your body because you're all, you're a skin bag with all of this, veins and arteries inside of you. So maybe but what I'm saying is maybe the forest is no different, but those relationships are somehow more fluid than that, because here's our primary predator. There's the bird that we saw in that pyramid, and understand that there's a relationship between that bird and what's going on in the soil. Its droppings aren't going to go out of the system. They're going to be reabsorbed by all of the soil life. Fungi might be transported around on the forest floor and become a part of many different food systems, and then eventually those nutrients become bioavailable back to the tree, and they're drawn back into the system again. You think about how everything cycles. Remember what here's Bill Mollison. He says, if we lose the forest, we lose our only teachers. We can always go back to nature to learn. Okay. And this is what he meant is we can start to think of this forest system as almost a closed loop system. Nothing's leaving, everything's just cycling around within it. There's mobile elements and things are being eaten by other things, but the actual nutrients, like the blood in your system going around, are not leaving. And Bill said there's no upper limit to productivity. Now that's just, I keep coming back to that statement because it's such a big statement. there's always room for another element in this system. As we add elements to the system, it becomes more efficient. It becomes more dynamic. Those nutrients are cycling faster. We don't need more nutrients. We just want them to cycle more quickly. And the more quickly they cycle, the more yield we can have, the more biomass we can support. Think about that when you want to run quickly. If you want to do more work, your heart beats faster and it circulates the nutrients in your system faster, so that your muscles and everything can carry on working. So think about, in a natural system, if the things start cycling quicker, we can do more work, we can support more species. Bill Morrison is saying to us here, think about your tree, a tree, an individual single component in your ecosystem, in your system, but it's not a single thing. Think of it as a cooperative. Think of it as a cooperative venture. And within that cooperative there's the tree and the leaves and all of its different things, but there are also all of the other elements that are part of that tree's ecosystem. Look, little insects that are feeding off the roots, or birds are nesting within the tree, or mammals are living within it. And the tree, as we know, is photosynthesizing, is pushing sugars. 30–40% of all the energy created by that tree is going into the soil, feeding soil microbes, feeding the hyphae of the fungi, and making the nutrients cycle around and become available to the plant. So think of your tree as a cooperative with many elements. The canopy of the tree represents an energy store, a water store. It's a reserve. Okay, so we can value that for what it is. He also goes on to say, let's think about there's a cooperative community within the soils as well. And as materials enter and pass through the system, they're changed, they interact. Water's being pulled up by the tree and evaporated into the atmosphere, humidifying the atmosphere, coming back down as condensation. Think about how sugar's moving through this system. It's been eaten by insects, then again returning that back to the system again, feeding the floor. They constantly dropping like honeydew or sugars to the roots, which feed the roots of the tree. Everything's connected to everything else. Even the roots of the trees of long-term plants join together by the fungal net. They're trading water, trading nutrients, trading hormones, trading antibodies, trading information between each other. So when we dig soils, when we disturb soils, we always forget we're disturbing the cooperative community in the soil. We don't want to do that. We want to minimize the amount of tillage we're doing, minimize or if we are making a big intervention like that, we want to do it having thought about that very carefully, understanding it's a significant change that we're making. So also think about how the mobile part. So first we're saying we've got our individual plants, but they're not really individuals. They're connected through the soil and through the soil mycelial web. They're connected through the organisms, the cooperative community in the soil. They're connected by this cooperative community as well above the soil, birds and mammals and insects visiting from one tree to another, communicating, again, nutrients and minerals, regulating populations, preventing things becoming pests, communicating in some ways messages between elements of the system. Reminded here, mycorrhiza, special root fungi, trade nutrients, legumes and other species, fix and supply nutrients. Think about animals as interactors and messengers and distributors of nutrients. A guild is a community of plants and animals and trees that controls the health and breeding of the browsers. Think of the relationship between these different elements and how chemical messages and hormonal messages are also moving between the plants, between the different elements in the system. And then here's our student. That's you. That's us as a permaculture learner. The system is acting as our teacher. Nature all around us is informing us and giving us insights, giving us feedback, because these systems are dynamic and constantly moving. So going back to the bike, you're correcting the wobble on the bike so you don't fall over. Well, imagine how many different wobbles are being corrected by all these complex predator-prey relationships, insect relationships, biology, bacterial, fungal relationships. In some ways, they're catching and storing and holding the nutrients in the system and then cycling them around and making them available to every other element. So I say it again, one of our take-home messages from this week is from nature, what we learn is everything is connected to everything else. And when the system is harmonious, when it's working well, it's abundant and dynamic and constantly changing, but also moving forward and accumulating. It's building, like we see in this picture here. It's regenerating, where each day there's a little bit more than there was the day before. The soil's becoming more alive. There's a greater ability to hold water. This is what you have to do. These are the measurements for your own plot. Is it growing in complexity? Are we cycling nutrients more effectively? Let's place yourself within that system, observe and interact, allow the system to educate you, accept feedback, and carry on interacting. That's how we do it. And that's our principal slideshow for this week. And I want to have a quick look at this one. And so we have about an hour, and this is a little PDF. It's about 2.2 megabytes, and we created it after a year, well, 6 months of working with refugees up at Bidi Bidi. And we created this as a field manual for teachers. I tried to imagine something that would be very easy to have on a mobile phone. It's 2 megabytes, and it reads, I put big text, simple images, so you can read it off a phone. Also, it's very easy to print out. It's basically in black and white. So you can use it as a teaching resource. And I wanted to create something that was very simple and memorable and usable, to help us remember our permaculture patterns to the core ideas. And I think for me, this idea of consensus building, using permaculture to make people feel like they're operating as a team, as a whole, as a system, is so important. Realizing that we're not in competition, and that if we're strategic about how we behave, we can all benefit. So here's my definition of permaculture. It's 3 things. It's a relationship between 3 things. These ethics, earth care, people care, fair share. We can really drill down and think about what those things mean. But that's our steering mechanism. And so we say we're guided by these ethics, and we're informed by these principles, which is what we learn from observing nature. And then we activate our objectives by utilizing our design tools. And that's where we're going with the latter parts of this course, is how do we implement this? How do we set permaculture in motion so it can transform ourselves, our communities, and ultimately contribute to the system that we are part of? Because we're all part of a system too, of an ecosystem, a social system, an economic system. Everything's connected to everything else, remember? And so if we create changes, those will impact on everything else in the system. So that's why I gave you the permaculture flower, is to think about, well, gosh, we've got to, we've got to touch on many different areas. Okay, so ethics, principles, design tools, that's permaculture. The ethics, we know that they're, and that the ethics work together to kind of steer us into a kind of a sweet spot where, yes, we're nourishing ourselves, our babies, our family, our community, but we're also, playing an active part of our community. And that what we're doing is also contributing to the ecosystem that we are part of. So we can think about the journey that we are on. The more we think about permaculture, the more we apply these ideas, the more we start to move into these overlap areas where what we're doing is good for us, but it's good for the planet. Or what we, in building ecosystems, we can nourish communities, and strong communities can support us. Think about those relationships. Think about, I would love to hear the thoughts of someone like Deborah there in Teso, how your permaculture journey has impacted on the community around you, how that's changed the whole ecosystem of your villages, and how that in itself is sort of feeds back on itself and grows. So I think many of us are going to have very interesting stories and to learn from doing this. It can be a long journey, but we have to start somewhere. Yakuba Sawadogo started just with bare soil, and he started by triggering a succession. That might be what it takes. If we've got to go right back to the beginning, then that's what we have to do. But remember what Buckminster Fuller said is, you don't beat the system by battling it, you beat it by coming up with a better idea. So this is our little reminder, really summary of the ethics. So, and this is my summary of the principles. And I just wanted to show you this and help, because I think it's good to remember, to feel that we know what we're doing. So there's only 12 principles, and you can remember them. It's not hard, and you can think about your own way of which you want to remember them. I think so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 principles. That's like the months of the year, the hours on the clock. Each principle has a statement, a saying, and an icon, an image. They're just to help you remember it in different ways. Sometimes, we're all slightly different. Maybe we remember things in different ways. A picture can help. A saying can create an idea, or a statement, something we can remember. Principle 1, observe and interact. That's the statement, that's the command. Thou shalt observe and interact. We're reminded beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So what your observation, you might be looking at the same thing as me, but you might see it differently. Okay, so that's a key thought. Good design is not something that's generated in isolation, but through continuous two-way interaction with the subject. Permaculture reminds us that we can solve problems through design based on experimentation and careful planning. We're going to observe and interact. We're going to bear in mind all the time, principle 2, this is such an important one, is this is what nature does, nature is catching and storing energy. And often that's energy. Easiest way to think of us in terms of the sun coming in. How are we going to trap that energy? Here he's got it in a bottle. That might be represent fruit or something like that. You imagine you try seasonal yield, and then we catch and store it by preservation. We're also, there's kind of a warning in this one. It says inappropriate concepts of wealth have led us to ignore opportunities to capture local flows of both renewable and non-renewable forms of energy. Identifying and acting on these opportunities can provide the energy with which we can rebuild capital, as well as provide income for our immediate needs. Okay, guys, we're starting off with nothing. What we got to do, catch and store energy. We need to build soil. Fertile soil is ecological capital. From fertile soil, we can grow maize, squash, and beans. That's income. Okay. The sources, some of the sources of energy that we might want to trap: sun, wind, runoff water flows, wasted resources from agricultural, industrial, commercial processes, and plus the annual surplus of twigs and grasses and leaves that we can convert to compost. See every potential resource as an opportunity, and think about how can you catch and store and make it cycle within the system. Don't let it leave until you've had some yields from it. And we'd said, make hay when the sun shines. By that, it means you usually get a small window of opportunity to catch and store energy. And then tomorrow it might not be there. So we've got to pay attention and grab the opportunity when it's there. Again, learn to see the patterns of availability. Okay, principle 3. This is what we spent the last 2 weeks thinking about, is obtain a yield. We're not just catching and storing energy for the sake of it. We're doing it because we need to eat. So we're building healthy soil, and we're using compost, and we're growing a forest because we want to eat. Because, and look, here's our vegetable. Something's already had a bite out of it. So we're also reminded it's not just us that need yields, it's every other element in the system, the worms, the birds. Think of that trophic pyramid. Realize that you're feeding at every level of that. A yield, profit or income, functions as a reward, and that reward encourages, maintains, or replicates the system that generated the yield. In other words, a yield is a feedback. So if you do the right thing and you get food, hey, there's an encouragement to do it again, to carry on doing that thing, to get better at it. Can I learn? Can I increase the yield? And that leads us to this one, where we're at today. We're on principle 4, which is about limits and feedback. The sins of the father are visited unto the 7th generation. That was that scary kind of saying. But we're really minded, and the image that we get here is of Earth. And actually, we can actually think about the planetary system as also a single ecosystem. On one level, it's even the planet is a single ecosystem, and the feedback that it's giving to us is climate change, is weather patterns are shifting. We're getting extreme weather and stuff because we're changing the composition of the atmosphere of the planet. So we are creating sins which are going to be visited unto, future generations will not be happy with us for the damage that we are causing. And we might say, oh, I'll be long dead by then. But think about what the legacies that our ancestors gave us. Think about the abundance of plants and knowledge and things that that have come to us over many generations. And all of this ecological damage from industrialization and chemical farming, that's only happened in the last 60, 80 years. It's relatively new. It's no excuse, but that's the reality. So feedback is information coming back to us as a response to our actions. This is our chance to learn and moderate actions to gain insight. To discount feedback is to discount information, and that's going to mean you're going to fall off your bike. And this is why also I believe that we need leadership from the majority world. I think the leaders, the people at the pinnacle of that energy pyramid, they feel that they are protected from ecological damage because, hey, they're the golden eagle in the ecosystem. And unfortunately, the people at the bottom are reporting back to them that there's problems and they're not listening. That's the metaphor we're in. And I honestly believe permaculture can fix this, but we can only fix it if we can bring everyone with us. We've got to be able to empower everyone around us. This is a everything or nothing kind of thing. So there's a lot at stake. Okay, so these principles encourage you to think permaculture. This is how we think permaculture, is we do it step by step. We can't just solve everything in one go. So again, think the flower, think of that process. So we need to observe and interact. We build strategies that catch and store energy. We're going to build soil, build fertility, build ecosystems. From those systems, as they develop, we're going to derive a yield for ourselves, because we can't work on an empty stomach. We have to meet our own needs. But if you're doing that at the expense of the system itself, then you're not going to supply, you're not going to survive. So there's got to be a relationship between the catching and storing energy and the yield that we take from it. And how do we know whether we're doing it right? Principle 4, we pay attention, we accept feedback. We say, is this working? Is it building up or is it breaking down? We try and make notes. How was it yesterday compared to today? How was this year compared to last year or next year? So it's essential to consider the short, medium, and long-term consequences of the design decisions we make. So understand that sometimes something might work in the short term, but at the expense of the long term. And ultimately, that's a catastrophic error. That's a big mistake to make. Principle 4 is, if you only remember one of these, it's this one. This is the key one. Everything's connected, everything's feeding back. It's there to teach you. You can learn from it. And going forward, if we want to design and build our own systems, we are becoming designers. We are being educated now from what we're observing. Here's principle 5 and 6 is use and value natural resources and services. Let nature take its course. Follow the natural principles. And the picture is of a horse, of a working horse. You might think of an oxen, or think of the difference between an oxen and a tractor to pull your plow. So the oxen, it can have babies, it can regenerate itself. It can do work, but only so much. And you can feed it on grass and it gives you manure, and the manure can obviously be used usefully in the farm. There's a natural process. Whereas if you go out and have a fantastic diesel tractor, it can do a lot more work. You can plow a lot more ground. You can achieve more. But it's actually going to damage the soil. It's going to be a long-term source of erosion of your soil with your big diesel tractor. You're going to have to, what does it run on? Well, it runs on diesel. That comes from, I don't know, Saudi Arabia. That comes from somewhere else, doesn't it? You can't feed a tractor on grasses. So permaculture is saying, in the language of business, renewable resources should be seen as our sources of income, while non-renewable resources can be thought of as capital assets. spending capital assets for day-to-day living is unsustainable in anyone's language. So you don't run a diesel-powered tractor to maintain the system, because at some point it's going to run out. That's using up capital. You could perhaps use a diesel-powered tractor to build a system, to dig a swale or a pond or a dam, so that then the whole system is stronger and benefits. So we understand the difference between capital and income. Capital are things you can only use once, and income, which is something which is constantly being produced. Your maize cobs is your income. The soil is the capital. If it is the soil, there's no income. Use and value natural resources and services and produce no waste. If we build new systems and extend productivity by using the natural materials that we have around us, rocks and sand and soil and plants and water and organic matter and so forth, then we're removing waste from the system. So here's another way of thinking of it: is your opportunity is what other people regard as waste. Now, it's an interesting thing for me to learn a bit more about, say, how it is in Nachi Valley, or what constitutes a waste, what resources you have. Anything that someone else doesn't value and throws away, potentially you can have that for nothing. If people don't understand the value of organic matter, you can harvest that and compost it, build systems. The earthworm is a suitable icon for this principle because it lives by consuming plant litter, wastes, which converts into humus that improves the soil environment for itself, for soil microorganisms, and for the plants. Thus, the earthworm, like all living things, is part of a web, where the outputs of one are the inputs of another. So thinking about these relationships and how, if we can balance outputs and inputs with each other, then we eliminate waste. If we're eliminating waste, we've created a closed loop system, just like your circulatory system, that can build and build and build and become more and more productive, and the stronger as it becomes stronger. This is the template that we have to learn from. And those first 6 principles are David Holmgren is guiding us through to tell us how to think about the patterns that we see in nature and how we might work with them to meet our own needs in the long term and be regenerative, not degenerative. Okay. So, and as we go into we carry on into our PDC, we'll move into the design phase. And then the question is, okay, this is the raw material of the ideas. Now can we organize those ideas in a way in which we can go out and we can create a design that really works? And that's what we're going to be doing on the second half of the course. We're going to be looking at these next set of principles, which I'll just touch on. We're going to come back over these. When we start thinking, so the first 6 are, if we observe nature, what do we learn? What does nature tell us? The second 6 are about how do we approach design? How do we apply this understanding to create change in the world? Well, we're told design from patterns to detail. Okay. It says the first 6 principles tend to consider systems from the bottom up perspective. We think about the elements, organisms, and individuals in the system. The second 6 principles tend to emphasize the top-down perspective of patterns and relationships that tend to emerge by system self-organization and co-evolution. Okay, so this is where we're going with the course, is we're trying to learn these lessons from nature and then think about how we're going to apply them to our own systems so the systems can self-organize and evolve. Because we have to allow each element to express its own evolution, if you like, its own energy. Think about how they're going to combine. So we're going to do this by seeing those patterns. We're going to try and integrate elements together to create beneficial relationships. So think of that forest interconnections picture. Think of the Three Sisters Guild of maize, beans, and squash. That's an integrated system. Integrate rather than segregate. That's where we're going to go with our design thinking. I'm going to encourage you to find small steps toward your goals. Slow and steady wins the race. We're going to try and create designs that are functional at every scale. We can start with something small and we can learn from it. And then as we learn and apply those lessons, we can replicate it. We can let it grow to its optimal size, and then we can replicate it. So think about the keyhole beds we talked about. Imagine designing and building a keyhole bed. You look around. What materials do we have? Observe and interact. We're going to combine those materials strategically to catch and store energy, build soil, trap moisture, create the right conditions for plants, the right amount of shade, the amount of humidity. Once we've done that, we can obtain yields. Those yields are then bed, and the plants in it are going to start to behave like a system, different components, all somehow interconnected and flowing. If we observe that system, it will give us feedback. We can improve it. We can continuously learn. And we're building that system from the available local and natural resources, and we're eliminating waste by creating effective design. And once we've done that once, we can do it again. Once we've learned how to do that, we can share that knowledge with someone else. We have created something. We have added value. And if we operate at a small scale and something doesn't work, then it's easy to correct. It's easy to learn the lesson. If we immediately start at a big scale and something fails, then that can be catastrophic. Maybe we had to borrow a lot of money, we did a lot of work to start something off, and then it doesn't work. Start small, let it grow, and as it grows, so will your knowledge and your confidence and your ability to do it. I'm constantly reminding you to use and value diversity. Grow polycultures, not monocultures. Look to more agroforestry type systems than just having herbaceous plants. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't rely on one single strategy to meet your needs. You need a range of strategies. You need a range of elements, and understand that because we're building systems that look a bit like pyramids, we want to have diversity so that there are many connections between the layers of the trophic layers of that system. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Use edges and value the marginal. Now, I've touched on edges. We get unique sets of conditions at edges. Also, this is a very interesting statement. It says, just because it's a well-beaten path doesn't mean you're on the right track. That's warning you not to just blindly follow the generation before you, the person in front of you, your next door neighbor. Just because it's a well-beaten path, it doesn't mean you're on the right track. Maybe we need to make fundamental changes. Let's go right back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who in the 1930s changed the rules of the economy because it wasn't working. He allowed himself to stray off the beaten path. Permaculture encourages you to look at things from different angles and to explore the edges. That might be a physical edge. It might be a cultural edge. It might be, it could take many forms. In the icon, we're seeing the sun coming up or down over the horizon. We're seeing a river in the foreground. We're seeing the uplands, the hills, and the lowlands. There's an edge between high and low, between wet and dry, between night and day, between on the path and on the beyond it. Within every land-based ecosystem, the living soil, which may only be a few centimeters deep, is an edge or interface between non-living mineral earth and the atmosphere. For all terrestrial life, including humanity, this is the most important edge of all. Only a limited number of hardy species can thrive in shallow, compacted, or poorly drained soil. Deep, well-drained, aerated soil is like a sponge, a great interface, which supports productive and healthy plant life. So do you remember when we looked at those pictures of soil, what we saw was edges between the particles where air and water can mix, where roots can move, and where mycorrhizal fungi can form and yeast communities can flourish. Don't think you're on the right track just because it's a well-beaten path. Reminds us that the most common, obvious, and popular is not necessarily the most significant or influential. It's giving you permission to think for yourself, to try out new pathways. And the principle 12, the final one, that completes the cycle and brings us back to number 1, is creatively use and respond to change. Everything's always changing, but those changes follow patterns, and through observation, we can find out where we are in those changes, whether it's seasons or generations or succession. All of these are different kinds of changes and patterns. And think again about that spiral on the flower diagram, how each time we go around and think at each one of those different areas, we also are advancing because we're learning, we're gaining knowledge. So each time we come back to something, we've got a little bit more to offer. We've got a little bit more insight. So this is our cycle of principles. And I guess I'm introducing this all now because I'm thinking about systems. How do we think in systems? And I think David Holmgren's given us an answer to that, is by, okay, we're guided by our ethics, but we think through these sequence of principles to make sure we're looking at every aspect of the problem and bringing all of this into our design, into our proposal, and into our ways forward. So I think it's a really significant contribution to permaculture is these, because they're very simple but powerful ideas, and you can remember them and kind of use them as a checklist to order your thoughts. I certainly do that. The other thing, and maybe this is a good sort of thing to edge towards to close off this lesson, and we'll have a few comments from you, but is I think there's something about permaculture that allows us to build consensus. How do we get everyone thinking in the same direction or in a parallel way, so we're not against each other? And something about permaculture's values, its ethics at the heart of it, gives us a chance to bring everyone, because we've got to start from a place of agreement. We're not going to agree about long-term, or complicated things or details if we can't agree about our, if you like, what's our direction? What are we trying to do here? What we're trying to do is earth care, people care, fair share. We're all trying to eat. We're all trying to meet our own needs. Let's collaborate using people care to build ecosystems that nourish all of us. That's our challenge. That's our long-term goal. Can we agree about that? Can we agree about the land or the resources we have around us so that we can organize it in a way in which we all get to meet our own needs? That's our long-term goal. Okay, we've got a big, distant goal. Now we've got to break that up to think about, well, how are we going to achieve that? We're going to need strategies to make food. We're going to need strategies for fertility. We're going to need strategies for biodiversity. We might need strategies for making some money. Let's now think about each one of those as going to be a sequence of activities that's going to then be part of that strategy. So what's our soil building strategy? And then what are the activities that we're going to take that are going to fulfill our soil building strategy? Well, okay. Capture some energy, make compost. Our soil building strategy is going to involve making compost, maybe growing green manures, starting off some nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs. We're going to look about profiling the land. We're going to think about swales, water catchment, zide pits. What happens when it rains? Where's that water going to go? Holding on to that's going to be part of our strategy. If we've managed to bring everyone in the community to understand why we're doing that, because it's informed by values, we've got a long-term goal, we're breaking it down into strategies. Those strategies then will have activities. You're going to make the compost heap, and you're going to need a bunch of sticks and some nails and some string. So now you know what resources you need to build your compost. You know why you're doing it. We're going to think about where it's going to go, and there we go. So think about how this simple model might allow us to bring together teams of people so that we can feel that we're on the same page. We're sharing values and identifying our long-term goals. And then from that, then we can figure out what it is that we're doing and who's doing what. And then hopefully we've got a sense of, yes, we're a team. Yes, we're moving towards a common objective. We have a strategy in mind. We have a place where we want to go. And yeah, okay, so we'll come back to this publication, and you're welcome to download it now. It's on the Academy website resource page. Or don't worry, otherwise we'll come back to it anyway. But it's all here, and this is, I'm trying to summarize these core ideas. We can keep them in mind and also use these ideas to build consensus with people around us. We have to find agreement. If we can't get to this part where we're together on something, and we're not going to be able to bring people with us for the whole journey. That's why I'm kind of laboring these points and trying to establish them very clearly, is because these are the building blocks of permaculture. They don't change. These are, and it doesn't matter what climate zone you're in or what group of people you're in, you're going to find commonalities, and you're going to be able to spot those patterns and then set in motion strategies that are going to help people meet their needs and that of the environment and that of their community. Okay, I'm happy just to take a pause. I'm sorry for it's been a little bit disrupted this week. And I would love to have some feedback or questions or thoughts from anybody there. I'm happy to react to questions or anything, just an observation that you've made. Please share with us. Gerald, I'll let you take the chair for a moment and let me have a little rest.
Okay, Steve. First and foremost, members, let's thank Steve. Yeah, despite the disruptions at the start and everything, he quickly grasped the mantle, and it's been one brilliant session. Yeah, and the reality is, I love permaculture as a whole, but then when it gets to systems thinking, going into systems, that's one of my favorite. So if anyone else has a contribution or a question, please, you're most welcome. But as well, you can simply unmute and say thank you or reflect on today's session. Please feel free. We would love to get your feedback. Actually, since the session has been, about feedback, how about we do the same for the session? Let's get feedback. Let's simply, and maybe one thing with, I've been doing adult learning and adult training and everything. Please don't sit back and think there is a stupid question or a stupid answer. There is nothing like a stupid question and there is nothing like a stupid answer. So anything you say or any contribution is really welcome. Joseph, Deborah.
I'm very much trying to visualize the circumstances that different people are in as well. So, and that's why I keep going back to the idea about patterns, is whether you're in a temperate climate or a hot, dry climate, actually the same processes are happening, but it just looks a bit different. And certainly when I first came out and began teaching permaculture in Uganda, I knew nothing about tropical systems. I really didn't, because I just spent my whole life in temperate ones. But I could quickly see that the same patterns, that I quickly identified what plants were nitrogen fixers or whatever, because they look the same. They have the same flowers. And even if you don't know the name, you can identify its function. That was very, very interesting and illuminating. But yeah,
you know, that's the beauty with permaculture, the universality of the key principles. Yeah, you know, as it says, patterns to details, the patterns or the foundational principles will remain standard, will remain the same. As you usually say, whether you're in tropics or template, water will always flow downhill. So some of these key principles or the foundation basics will always remain universal, no matter your geographical positioning or where you're located.
and these very powerful processes like succession happen everywhere too, but there just might be different plants or, you know, slightly different processes, but it's the same process, but, you know, different players, different individuals. But and this is what I'm saying is about, we're really interested in the function. So if you like, succession is a function, biodegradation is a function, and the elements that bring that about might be slightly different in your climate to my climate, but that function is still the same, and it's essential to every living system. If we don't have that, you know, complete the nutrient cycle, then the system will run out of material. That's simple, really.
Yeah, and some of these functions, actually, you'll find they remain the same. It's a matter of lesser conditions. Compost will be compost, whether you found it in Europe or in US or in Africa, it will be compost. The only difference is probably the process is slower in the temperate, but the reality is, at the end of the day, it's all template, it's all compost, and it will come to the, you know, the same foundational principle that is soil building, is, you know, working with nature, or, you know, using working with nature, basically. Yeah, and maybe taking us back, I think Simon, today's session also further answers your question on pests. When we talk about now the trophic levels, still now it goes back. Wherever you have too much of anything or an excess of any level in between, that's when now you're starting to get the negative feedback, which is essentially or conventionally called probably pests. But otherwise, if you're working around with your system, actually, if your system is fairly in balance, which actually is not your role to play. Your role is to provide probably the right placement or to support the system to be in balance. You're not going to start, drawing it to the balance. You just basically provide the right elements or to support the system.
That's right. We've seen that today in a couple of images, the idea that the system's teaching you, it's giving you feedback. And then that's putting you in a role of your job is to restore the balance, not to go to war with the grasshoppers or whatever, that pest or that presence of something is giving you information. And your role is to use that information to inform what you do next, to help find the balance of the system. And yeah, something that I've observed, the difference between temperate and tropical is in the tropics, things happen much quicker. Like you said, Gerald, things germinate and grow fast. And so if you have a problem, it can take over very quickly as well. So you can get sick and die very easily. The kind of diseases you get in the tropics. What I find is when I'm in Africa, I'm very healthy. I'm much healthier than I am when I'm in the UK. But there's the danger that you might get, I don't know, malaria or cholera and drop down dead. So it said something about whereas we're also like in a temperate climate, things happen much more slowly. It takes years to build soil, and we're never particularly well, but we're never particularly unwell. We're kind of, I don't know, we're caught in the halfway. But more seriously, yeah. What you can do in 2 years, it takes us 10 years to do in terms of biomass. So it's a double-edged sword, this. So if you get things wrong in the tropics and you get a really heavy rainstorm and you didn't get the system right, all your soil is gone. That's it. And you're back to the beginning. Whereas in the more temperate climates, it tends to happen much more slowly. So things break down more slowly. But it takes years to build them up. So actually, it's, there's no right or wrong. There's swings and roundabouts. There's different relative advantages. But to know this, that where you guys are in the equatorial regions is, if you get it right, you can build and grow systems really, really quickly. And that's an exciting thing to know.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, thanks to the team. Hopefully, looking forward to see you on the next session. Unless anyone has a final say, but I think we could call it a session for today. Glory, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead and.
Thank you, all members. First of all, I need to introduce myself. My name is Glory. I live in Nakivale refugee camp in Uganda. I've studied permaculture at Butambala. Ali Tebandeke was my teacher. Now I'm teaching permaculture in my community in Nakivale. So I have a question about the principles, because I learned and I'm teaching those principles. Principle number 4, as I know, was regulate yourself and accept feedback. But now Steve teaches it's limit and feedback. I don't know if it was changed or I don't know. I'm confused at that point.
Okay, thank you for your question, Glory, and I can answer you straight away. I've caused the confusion. So I apologize. It's saying the same thing, but in a slightly different way. So it's what you said. But so I just summarize it differently. I just said it slightly differently. That's all.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Glory. And yeah, it's apply self-regulation and accept feedback. But then also, usually, depending on the audience you're talking to, you know, there is room for flexibility. They're not so much written in stone, but then you have to make sure it still reflects the same kind of basics. So also when, please feel free to download that booklet. It's a very portable version of actually an entire PDC, and then somehow it's a whole lot of work to condense it to that much, but then it's a good guide for all those who are aspiring to go into training. Good to hear that, you know, Glory is taking on that mantle, and that's our aspiration to have the next Steve or to have the next Gerard from the team. Thank you. Steve, over to you to sum it up.
Okay. Unless there is another question. Yeah, so thank you for that question, Glory. And let me just, I'm really excited yeah, to meet you and to know that you trained with Ali and really good connections. And this is what I mean by, if we can build more connections between us, we're starting to build a complex system, and we can be here to support each other. Each one of us can become a way of, you know, communicating permaculture ideas, inspiring the people around us, and creating working models that we can all learn from. Because I think that's the most important thing, is it's as you see permaculture, as you interact with it, that's when you really start to learn it. So I thank everyone for being here and for your patience during the glitches. And yeah, thank you very much for your contributions. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
That's a good night from me then. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.